My name is Vivian. If you were to open the archives of any glossy magazine from a decade ago, showcasing the finest homes of our province, you would undoubtedly stumble upon a sprawling mansion of white limestone, its facade draped in perfectly manicured ivy. Posed on the grand staircase of this house is a family, a dapper, silver-haired man with an air of noble authority, a woman with an immaculate updo, elegantly holding the hem of her silk gown, and a golden-haired boy with an open, disarming smile. Slightly to the side, almost blurred due to a sudden movement, stands a thin teenage girl swimming in an oversized, high-necked sweater. That is me, the person the photographer simply forgot to ask to step into the center of the frame. In our family, there was always a tacit yet rigid hierarchy, closely resembling the structure of an investment fund. My brother William was its crown jewel, the prime asset. Highly liquid, reliable, yielding 100% dividends in the form of pride, universal admiration, and social status. As for me, I was that risky, defective startup that was easier to write off as a loss during the very first audit than to waste resources trying to fix. A regrettable error in the calculations, as my father once sighed wearily in his study, thinking I was fast asleep. But this story is not a cliché grievance of a child starved of parental warmth. It is the chronicle of a planned, cold-blooded betrayal delivered to me on the happiest day of my life, wrapped in the shimmering paper of propriety and care. Our family had spent decades building this facade, polishing every single tile, yet it took only one sentence for this crystal mausoleum to shatter, burying their own future beneath its shards. And the most terrifying part is that the detonator in this trap was set by the person I loved more than life itself, despite everything. If you had stepped into our house on any given weekday, you would have been struck by the silence. This was not the cozy quiet of a family hearth. It was the ringing, sterile silence of an operating room or a boardroom. Every action adhered to an invisible, unyielding schedule. Breakfast at 7:30 sharp, where father scanned the financial press and mother cross-checked the menu for the week. Starched napkins, the noiseless steps of the servants, the faint clink of sterling silver spoons against finest porcelain. We did not discuss the weather. We did not share our dreams. We reported on our productivity. William sat at father's right hand. By the age of 16, he already moved with the poise of an adult, self-assured man. His manners were the product of hundreds of hours of rigorous training. He knew exactly at what angle to hold his knife, how to smile at debutantes at charity galas, and how to converse with the dean of the academy where he had been groomed to go since childhood. He was the embodiment of our parents' dreams, the golden boy whose path was paved with rose petals and hefty checks. Father looked at him with the pride of a collector who had acquired a priceless artifact. Mother hung on his every word as if they were prophetic oracles. I sat opposite them, chronically disheveled, with ink stains on my fingers, because instead of studying macroeconomics, I spent my time furiously sketching fashion designs, drawing charcoal portraits of passers-by, and writing stories in battered notebooks. My presence at the table was a mere concession to public appearance. If society did not frown upon hiding one's children away, my parents would have gladly locked me in a closet. "Vivian," Mother said, not even lifting her eyes from her zero-calorie toast as she corrected me. "Your posture. You are slouching so low you look as if you are trying to crawl under the table. Look at William. He has a debate at the college today, and representatives from the press will be there. We must look impeccable. Please wear the blue dress I bought for you, and do not attempt to engage the guests in conversation. Your laugh. It is far too loud. It grates on the nerves." I gripped my fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. The metal bit into my skin, but that physical sting was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of that dining room. "What if I don't want to go to this debate, Mother? I have a portfolio review at the art studio today. The instructor said I have a real shot at a tuition grant." Father slowly lowered his newspaper. His gaze, heavy as a tombstone, shifted onto me. There was no anger in his eyes. There was something worse. The absolute, icy detachment of an analyst confronting a defective product. "Vivian," he spoke in his low, velvety baritone, the voice he usually reserved for announcing corporate mergers or laying off hundreds of employees. An art studio is an amusement for those who do not need to think about the future. Your drawings will not feed you, and they certainly bring no value to our family name. We do not spend fortunes on your tutors for you to stain your fingers with cheap paint. You will attend your brother's debate. The family must display unity. William is our public face. It is your duty to measure up. I don't owe anyone anything, I whispered softly but distinctly, staring down at my plate. Mother let out a heavy sigh and pressed a starched napkin to her temple, as if my words had triggered an instant migraine. Arthur, do something! She is starting again! My blood pressure will skyrocket from her tantrums, and I still have to coordinate the floral arrangements for the evening reception. Father did not shout. He never stooped to shouting. It was beneath his dignity. He simply made a slight gesture with his hand, and the maid instantly whisked my plate away, though I had barely touched the food. You are excused, Vivian. We will resume this conversation when you learn to respect the labor of others and the resources so generously invested in you. I stood up from the table, feeling a suffocating lump rise in my throat. As I passed William, I hoped to catch even a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. We were brother and sister, after all. We slept under the same roof. We had shared childhood secrets when our parents were away on their endless business trips. But William stared straight ahead, neatly dabbing his lips with a napkin. He had already made his choice. He had accepted the rules of the game. He was a part of the machine, its primary cog, in fact. And for the sake of his own comfort, for the endless praise and boundless allowances, he was perfectly willing to ignore how that machine was slowly grinding me into dust. My only sanctuary became the attic room, where my parents almost never set foot. Mother considered that part of the house too drafty and dusty, and Father simply didn't have the time to explore utility spaces. There, amidst old furniture draped in dust sheets, broken floor lamps, and boxes of forgotten Christmas decorations, I carved out a world of my own. I hung my canvases from the wooden rafters, burned cheap scented candles to mask the smell of dampness, and painted deep into the night. I painted winged figures shattering against glass domes, dark, brooding castles surrounded by towering fences, and girls whose mouths were stitched shut with golden threads. It was my therapy, my only way to keep from losing my mind in this house of perfect mannequins. William would occasionally come up there. It only happened late at night when our parents were asleep, and he had returned from his advanced legal seminars or the exclusive youth clubs Father had pulled strings for him to join, to cultivate useful connections. He would enter quietly, without knocking, sit on the old leather sofa covered in a layer of dust, loosen the knot of his expensive silk tie, and silently watch me apply strokes to the canvas. "Why do you provoke them, Viv?" he asked softly one night, looking at a new sketch of mine that depicted skeletons in expensive suits seated around a luxurious dining table. "It's so simple. Just smile, say what they want to hear, wear what they ask, and they'll leave you alone. They'll give you money, buy you a car, set you up in a prestigious college. Why must you always run headfirst into a wall? What do you gain from this rebellion?" I turned to him, holding a brush stained with paint from my palette knife. My face was probably smudged with pigment, but I couldn't have cared less. "Because if I do that, William, there will be nothing left of me. Don't you see? Absolutely nothing. I'll just be another mannequin in a blue dress speaking rehearsed lines. Don't you see what they are doing to us? They don't love us as human beings. They love their investments. They love the picture in the magazine. They care about making the neighbors envious, about showing their business partners a flawless facade. The fact that everything beneath that facade is rotting away doesn't concern them in the least." William smiled sadly. For a split second, something human, deep, and locked away behind the 7 gates of his pristine upbringing flickered in his eyes. For a moment, I thought he might agree with me, throw his tie to the floor, and admit that he was exhausted too. "Be that as it may, Viv. But that picture provides us with a premium life. Look around. We have the best tutors, the best prospects, security. Why break something that works? The world is built this way. Some submit now so they can rule later. "You have everything, William," I corrected him, feeling the wall rise between us once more. "And all I have is permission to attend your celebrations as a silent background prop. You get millions for your submission, while I get nothing but constant reprimands." He found no answer. He simply stood up, neatly smoothed his jacket, brushed an invisible speck of dust from his shoulder, and retreated to his room, morphing back into the perfect android built to conquer the heights of high society. I was left alone in the dark of the attic, listening to the creak of the floorboards, knowing that an abyss had opened between me and my only brother, one that could never be bridged by words or shared childhood memories. We were on opposite poles of the same family tragedy. Time did not walk. It rolled along tracks that father had laid down with iron certainty. The calendar pages turned with terrifying speed, stripping away the remnants of my youth. William graduated from his elite academy with honors. His graduation night resembled a royal reception, a rented historical estate, the city's finest caterers, high-ranking guests who approached father to congratulate him on his magnificent successor. William sailed into a prestigious law school without a hitch, and his name was immediately fast-tracked onto the future partner tracks of one of the oldest law firms in the city. He moved through life like a hot knife through butter, a stranger to refusal or doubt. Meanwhile, I was fighting a small, guerrilla war for the right to breathe. I categorically refused to major in economics, where father tried to shove me to understand family assets. The fallout lasted a month. Mother wept in her bedroom, accusing me of driving her to an early grave. Father stopped speaking to me entirely, completely ignoring my existence at the dinner table. Eventually, they relented, but their surrender carried the weight of a penalty. "Fine," father spat coldly, tossing the documents onto his desk. "If you insist on wasting your life smudging paper, you will attend the local College of Arts. But do not expect me to pay for an education in the capital or abroad. I have no intention of throwing family capital to the wind. We will cover the minimum tuition fees here. Everything else is your problem. And you can thank us for letting you keep a room in this house. Most in your position would already be packing their bags." I didn't say thank you. I walked out of his office feeling a strange, wild weightlessness. It was a challenge, and I accepted it. To pay for paints, canvases, and basic living expenses, I got a job. At first, I mopped floors at a local art gallery after classes. I didn't care if any of my parents' acquaintances saw me with a mop in hand. On the contrary, there was a twisted pleasure in shattering their perfect myth about me. Later, I began working as an assistant decorator, taking night shifts to dress store windows and sketching low-paying designs for local tailors. My hands permanently smelled of solvent, acrylic, and cheap instant coffee. I slept 4 hours a night, occasionally dozing off right during lectures, and my jeans were worn thin at the knees, but for the first time in my life, I felt free. I was no longer dependent on their temperament. Every cent I earned myself, every banknote that smelled of real labor and sweat, felt more substantial than all the millions sitting in William's trust accounts. Slowly but surely, I was carving out my own personal independence from their crystal mausoleum. And it was during this period, when I was on the brink of total physical and emotional exhaustion, when the world felt like an endless grind of work and study, that Jacob entered my life. We met at an underground exhibition for independent artists. It was a damp, gritty basement of a former warehouse, smelling of mold and cheap wine. I was exhibiting a series of my graphic pieces, stark, black and white drawings of birds trapped inside cages of thick barbed wire, their beaks tied shut with heavy knots. It was a metaphor for my childhood. My pain poured onto paper. Jacob stood in front of those drawings longer than anyone else. He wore a simple, slightly faded wool sweater of a chunky knit, old jeans, and heavy boots dusted with concrete grit. He didn't look like a regular at art galleries. He completely lacked the artificial, refined veneer that I despised in William's circle. He was broad-shouldered, dependable, and radiated an aura of calm and strength. Jacob was an architect, but not the kind who designed soulless glass boxes for massive corporations. He worked for a municipal restoration bureau, bringing old wooden houses back to life, building community centers, shelters, and genuinely believing that architecture should serve people and help them live, rather than just stroke the egos of wealthy clients. "There's too much anger in these birds," he said without turning around, noticing me standing beside him. His voice was low, steady, and remarkably warm. "But this anger, it's the right kind. It doesn't destroy blindly, it seeks a way out. It's trying to break through a wall." I smiled faintly, burying my hands in my jacket pockets. "It's been trying to break through that wall for many years, but the wall is too thick. Sometimes it feels easier to shatter against it than to make a single crack." Jacob turned to face me. He had striking eyes, deep gray, with tiny crinkles at the corners that appeared whenever he smiled. There was none of that calculating, cold gleam I was accustomed to at home. Father always looked at people as line items of expenses or income. William viewed them as potential clients or competitors. Jacob looked at me as if I were a whole universe, significant and fascinating in my own right, regardless of my status, last name, or clothes. "You don't need to ram a wall with your head," he said softly, smiling. "You take it down brick by brick, and if the wall is too monolithic, you simply turn your back on it and build your own house, far away from it. Would you like some coffee? There's a great little place nearby. They brew amazing espresso, and they don't ask silly questions about contemporary art." That evening changed everything. Jacob swept into my life like a gust of fresh, crisp air into a stifling, unventilated room. He showed me that human relationships could be different, that people could gather not to boast about car brands, discuss stock indexes, or flaunt real estate. He unlocked a world where sincerity, kindness, and mutual support were the baseline. We could walk for hours through the night city, debate philosophy, discuss architectural styles, share a single slice of cheap pizza, and feel like the happiest people on earth. He taught me to laugh out loud without looking over my shoulder, without fearing that my laughter grated on someone's nerves. With him, I finally felt safe. Next to him, I finally began to understand who I truly was. When our relationship turned serious, I knew I had to introduce him to my parents. It was a matter of protocol, a formality I felt obliged to fulfill to officially close that chapter. I knew it would be a disaster, but the reality surpassed even my bleakest expectations. Dinner was arranged in our grand, formal dining room. Everything was prepared to the highest standard: porcelain, silver, expensive wines. Father sat at the head of the table, Mother opposite him. William arrived with his fiancée, Claire, a girl from a highly affluent and influential family. Her parents owned the largest network of private medical clinics in the country, and this match was heralded by our parents as an ideal merger of capital and reputation. Claire was a seamless extension of my brother: perfect posture, pearls around her neck, polished nails, and an ability to maintain hollow, polite small talk for hours while smiling only with her lips. Jacob felt out of place in this setting. His simple jacket, purchased from an ordinary department store, looked foreign amidst the haute couture, but he carried himself with remarkable dignity. He didn't try to play a part, he didn't fawn over Father, and he didn't try to impress anyone with fake knowledge of vintage wines. "So, Jacob," Father said, sipping wine from his glass, evaluating my fiancé from the height of his grandeur as if appraising a used car of dubious quality. "Architecture is a fine field. Our city is expanding rapidly. Land values are soaring. Which major development agency do you work for? Surely you are involved in designing the new business center on the waterfront? I am well acquainted with the owner of that firm. We could discuss your prospects." "No, Mr. Arthur," Jacob replied calmly and firmly, looking Father straight in the eye. "I don't work for private developers. I work for the Municipal Restoration Bureau. Currently, our main project is the restoration of the old historic quarter on the outskirts. We are bringing 19th century wooden structures back to life, recreating unique carvings, and reinforcing foundations. It is crucial work for preserving the city's cultural heritage." Mother let out a faint, barely audible chuckle, which she promptly and hastily masked with a short cough, pressing a silk handkerchief to her lips. "The historic heritage of the slums? Goodness, how eccentric. And how much does the city administration actually pay to preserve these rotting, dilapidated boards? Surely it barely covers the cost of parking downtown. Claire smiled politely, lowering her eyes, while William quickly took a sip of wine, carefully avoiding looking at me. I felt a fierce, unmanageable rage begin to boil inside me. But Jacob didn't even flinch. He didn't lower his gaze. His voice remained just as calm and deep, though a distinct steeliness entered his tone. "The pay is modest, Mrs. Eleanor. The budgets are indeed tight. But for me, the value of my work isn't measured solely by the numbers in a contract or the number of zeros in a bank account. We are returning their history to the people. We are preserving the soul of this city, its roots. Generations of families lived in those houses, and they deserve to have their memory respected." Father slowly, deliberately lowered his knife and fork onto the porcelain plate. The clatter echoed like a gunshot. The atmosphere at the table instantly plummeted below freezing. Everyone froze. "Young man," Father said, his voice dropping into that chilling, ominous politeness that always preceded the absolute annihilation of a competitor in his business. "The value of everything in this world is measured exclusively by numbers. Everything else is romantic nonsense for the poor and the lazy. If your work does not generate profit, if it does not accumulate capital, then it is useless to society. That is a foundational, immutable law of economics. And I am deeply sorry that my daughter, despite all our efforts and the resources invested in her, chooses a social circle where these fundamental truths are ignored. We hoped you would mature over time, Vivian, but your choice is disappointing." "Father!" I stood up abruptly, my chair screeching back against the floor. "You have no right to speak to him like that. Jacob does honest and vital work. He doesn't steal, he doesn't build financial pyramids, and he doesn't deceive people, unlike many of your successful partners." Mother immediately clutched her hand to her chest. "Arthur, look at her! She is making a scene in front of guests! What vulgarity! What a disgrace! Claire, dear, forgive us, please. Vivian has always had issues with self-control." Jacob rose smoothly right after me. He placed his large hand on my shoulder, and that touch instantly restored my ability to think clearly. He looked at Father, then at Mother. There was no resentment or anger in his gaze, only a profound, deep compassion that made Father flinch more than any insult could have. "Everyone has their own economics, Mr. Arthur," Jacob said quietly and politely. "Some invest in concrete, glass, and offshore accounts, while others invest in people, memory, and integrity. Time will tell which investment proves to be more durable. Thank you for the dinner, Mrs. Eleanor. Everything was very exquisite. But it is time for us to leave. Vivian, let's go." We walked out of the dining room under the dead silence of my parents and the triumphant, cold gaze of Claire. William never lifted his head. As we stepped onto the porch of our massive mansion, I inhaled the cool autumn air and realized that this dinner was the final dot. I would never return to this house as a supplicant or a submissive daughter. I knew a grueling path lay ahead, but beside me stood a man who did not fear the storm, and that made me absolutely invincible. We began planning our wedding a few months after that memorable dinner. We decided right away that we would do everything ourselves, down to the last penny. We didn't want my parents to have the slightest excuse to say they had sponsored our celebration. We didn't want to see their arrogant expressions at a festival that belonged solely to us. Those were 2 years of rigid, exhausting frugality. Jacob worked on restoration by day and took night shifts on construction sites as a foreman or consultant. I worked as a freelance designer around the clock. My workday began at 6 in the morning and ended well past midnight. I created brand identities for small coffee shops, typeset menus for restaurants, and selected textiles and wallpapers for private apartments. We cut corners on absolutely everything we could. We forgot what it was like to go to the movies or dine at restaurants. We bought the most basic groceries on discount. We didn't buy ourselves new clothes, wearing our old things until they were threadbare. Our tiny rented apartment on the outskirts of the city resembled a warehouse. Rolls of wallpaper, cans of paint, wood samples, and sketches were scattered everywhere. We often argued from chronic exhaustion. Our nerves were stretched to the limit. But every time we sat on the floor of our small kitchen, drank cheap tea, and looked at our joint savings jar, we understood what it was all for. We were building our life on a solid, honest foundation. Free of parental handouts, free of conditions, and free of unspoken contracts. When the time came, I sent out wedding invitations to my parents. I did it purely out of a sense of duty, so that no one could accuse me of breaching basic etiquette. I didn't expect gifts. I didn't expect warm words. But what happened next became the opening act of our family drama's final curtain. A week after the invitations were sent, Mother called me. Her voice on the line sounded unusually quiet, dry, and somehow strained. It was as if she were performing a complex, well-rehearsed play. "Vivian," she began, not even asking how I was doing. "We received your invitation. Naturally, your father and I will attend the ceremony. We cannot allow rumors to circulate in society that there is a rift in our family. It would damage your father's and William's reputations. But I am calling you to clarify one important point right away. You must understand, Vivian, we are currently in a very difficult, practically critical financial situation. The market is volatile, your father's new investment projects require massive capital injections, and our primary accounts are virtually frozen by banks for auditing. We are barely making ends meet just to maintain the outward status of our household." She paused, as if waiting for my reaction, but I remained silent, listening to her breathing over the phone. "Therefore, Vivian," she continued in a harder tone, "do not expect any financial gifts or assistance from us. Since you decided to throw this modest countryside wedding of yours, you must rely entirely on your own strength. We won't be able to spare even $100 for your expenses. We are having to cut back on everything ourselves. I hope you will show prudence and not make a scene over the lack of an expensive gift." I felt a familiar, icy bitterness pool inside me. It sickened me to listen to this lie, sickened me to realize that even now, on the eve of my wedding, they were staging this cheap performance. But I restrained myself. "I don't need your money, Mother," I replied calmly and firmly. "Jacob and I earned the money for this wedding ourselves. We paid for every flower, every glass, and the venue rental. We don't need anything from you. Just come and sit for a couple of hours, if, of course, that isn't too devastating for your difficult financial situation." She said a curt goodbye and hung up. For a second, I actually felt sorry for them. I thought, could Father really be having problems? Is their business collapsing? I even felt a twinge of guilt for my sharp tone. If only I had known what an abyss of hypocrisy lay behind that phone call. The day of our wedding turned out to be remarkably warm and sunny. It was the beginning of summer. We rented an old, partially abandoned apple orchard at a small historic estate an hour's drive from the city. Our friends helped us transform this place into a genuine fairy tale. With our own hands, we hung hundreds of paper lanterns between the sprawling branches of the trees. Lanterns I had glued together myself from rice paper late at night. We set up simple wooden tables knocked together by Jacob and his workshop colleagues, decorating them with armfuls of wildflowers, daisies, and lavender we had gathered the morning before. My dress was the realization of my lifelong dream. I had found it at a vintage market, an antique gown of thick ivory silk. I spent 3 weeks altering it to fit my figure, hand-embroidering the hem and sleeves with tiny river pearls and delicate lace given to me by my college instructor. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw a strong, proud, and truly beautiful woman. I was not a shadow of anyone else, nor a backdrop for William. I was Vivian, and this was my day. The atmosphere in the orchard was incredible. A small jazz band played, students from the conservatory who were friends of Jacob's. The guests laughed, drank simple but delicious local wine, and danced right on the grass. Jacob looked at me with eyes that made it seem as though the rest of the world had ceased to exist, as if I were the greatest treasure on earth. I felt absolutely happy. My parents arrived just as the ceremony was about to begin. They looked like two alien elements accidentally teleported from another dimension. Father was in his invariably expensive suit. Mother wore a silk ensemble and dark sunglasses, even though the orchard offered a pleasant canopy of shade. They sat in the front row of wooden chairs, with expressions that suggested they were witnessing a public execution. Mother demonstratively produced a wet wipe and cleaned her seat before sitting down, while Father checked his gold watch every 5 minutes. William arrived a bit later, alone. Claire could not attend, citing an abrupt trip to a spa resort with her mother. My brother looked flawless, as always. A perfect tuxedo, styled hair, a canned Hollywood smile for the group photographs. The ceremony went beautifully. As Jacob and I exchanged vows, I saw tears in my friend's eyes and genuine smiles all around. Even nature seemed to rejoice for us. A light, warm breeze drifted through the trees, showering us in white apple blossom petals that fell onto my veil like living confetti. Everything was going perfectly until the reception began. The guests broke into groups. Some roasted marshmallows by a large bonfire Jacob had set up at the edge of the orchard, while others danced. I stood slightly apart from the tables, under an old, wide apple tree, enjoying the cool of the evening and admiring the lanterns. At that moment, William approached me. He held a glass of our simple sparkling wine, thoughtfully swirling it and watching the bubbles. His face wore that strange, pitying yet triumphant smile I remembered from childhood, the smile of a victor who had come to condescend to the defeated. "Well, Viv," he said quietly, leaning his back against the tree trunk. "Congratulations. You actually did it. Your own way, against everyone's wishes. It's very budget-friendly, of course. Paper lanterns, wildflowers. Feels a bit like a hippie festival. But I must admit, it has a certain charm. For a certain class of people." "Thank you, William," I replied, feeling every muscle inside me instantly tighten. I knew my brother far too well to believe he had approached me just to offer a compliment. We wanted the celebration to be sincere. We wanted only those who are truly happy for us to be here, without the pretension. William laughed softly, taking a sip of wine and wincing slightly. "Yes, there's certainly no pretension here. The champagne is oversweetened, by the way, but it suits this atmosphere. You know, Viv, I actually came over to tell you something. Our parents asked me to keep quiet, begged me not to say a word so as not to ruin your modest little party. They didn't want you throwing a tantrum or getting upset, but I thought, we're brother and sister. There shouldn't be secrets between us. And honestly, it's just unfair that you are living in a bubble." I turned my entire body toward him. The air in the orchard suddenly felt unbearably hot and sticky. My heart began to thud in my ears with heavy, slow strokes. "What bubble are you talking about, William? Speak plainly, don't weave your legal riddles." My brother leaned closer. His expensive cologne, smelling of leather, premium tobacco, and musk, instantly overpowered the delicate, clean scent of the blossoming orchard. The scent felt like the smell of danger. "Yesterday, Father finalized a massive deal," he whispered, and that same victorious, obliterating gleam flared in his eyes that I had so often seen in Father's. "They bought me a massive countryside villa in the most exclusive gated community in the suburbs. 500 square meters, a pool, security, and to top it off, a huge penthouse downtown with a view of the waterfront, registered in my name. It's their wedding gift to Claire and me for our upcoming nuptials. The deal was 6 months in the making. Father allocated colossal funds for this from his personal reserves. They asked me not to tell you, because Mother called you spinning some yarn about a crisis and frozen accounts, just so you wouldn't ask them for money for this apple orchard picnic of yours. But you have to understand, Viv, business is business. Capital must flow where it yields dividends." The world collapsed around me. The paper lanterns seemed to rip from their branches and plummet, setting everything ablaze. The jazz music morphed into an unbearable, brain-scratching ultrasound. I stared at my groomed, smiling brother and felt a mortal, paralyzing cold spread beneath my skin. In my head, Mother's voice echoed like a siren. "A difficult financial situation. Accounts frozen. We are barely making ends meet. We won't be able to spare even $100. They lied. They lied straight to my face, cold-bloodedly, calculatedly, without a shred of hesitation. Not because they actually lacked money, but because I did not deserve that money. I was not a part of their investment strategy. I was vacuum, a void that was unprofitable to fund. They hoarded every cent for their golden boy, for his perfect marriage to the perfect Claire, while they simply wrote me off like defective material, inventing a foul, cheap fairy tale about bankruptcy. A villa? My voice sounded so quiet and hollow, as if I were speaking from the bottom of a deep well. A penthouse? Millions of dollars. Yesterday? William nodded dismissively, pleased with the effect he had produced. He adjusted the cuffs of his snow-white shirt. Well, yes, Viv. Be a realist, for heaven's sake. Father always thinks strategically. My marriage to Claire isn't just a wedding, it's a merger of two of the largest businesses in the region. This gift is a demonstration of our status, our power to her parents. It's a wise investment in the stability of the lineage. But you? You're marrying a guy who restores old ruins for pennies. What's the point of investing in your wedding? You two will stay on the same level regardless. Father can't afford to risk his reputation and funds for your artistic whims. You chose this path of independence yourself, so don't take offense now. Everyone gets what they negotiated for. Everyone gets what they negotiated for. An investment in stability. In that very fraction of a second, the last tiny sentiment connecting me to these people died within me. The last thin thread of parental love that I had desperately clung to throughout my childhood snapped with a dry, sickening pop. I no longer felt pain. I didn't feel resentment. In place of those feelings came an absolute, icy, ringing emptiness. I realized that before me stood neither parents nor a brother. Before me stood alien, predatory creatures who measured the worth of human life strictly on a scale of commercial utility. I turned my back on William, not even bothering to finish listening to his next sentence about strategic planning. My silk dress rustled against the grass as I walked across the entire orchard toward the veranda of the old estate. There, in a wicker armchair, sat Mother. She was sipping mineral water from a glass, lazily fanning herself, and observing the dancing guests with undisguised contempt. "Mother!" I stepped right up to her. My shadow fell across her face, causing her to frown slightly. She slowly lowered her fan and looked at me through her dark sunglasses. "What is it, Vivian? I hope you aren't about to drag me into those ridiculous dances on the grass. I've already ruined my heels on these pathways of yours, and I have a splitting headache from this monotonous jazz music." "William just told me about the countryside villa and the downtown penthouse," I said. My voice was frighteningly calm, quiet, and even. There wasn't a single emotion in it, and that was precisely what caused Mother to truly tense up for the first time all day. She froze for an instant, her hand holding the glass of water halting halfway to the table. She slowly removed her dark sunglasses, and I saw her eyes, cold, calculating, with a flash of bewilderment that vanished in a fraction of a second. She instantly composed herself. Her face reassumed its mask of icy, arrogant superiority. She placed the glass on the small table and neatly smoothed the folds of her expensive silk ensemble. "Ah, William, that boy never could keep his mouth shut when he's had a drink," she sighed haughtily, not even bothering to deny the obvious. "Well, fine, Vivian, since you found out anyway. Yes, it is true. We bought him that property. And what of it? Are you planning to make a scene in front of these eccentric friends of yours because of this?" "You lied to me," I whispered, feeling my nails dig into my palms until they bled beneath the folds of my dress. "You lied straight to my face for 2 months, telling me stories about frozen accounts, about a crisis, about not having a single dollar to help me. Why was this foul performance necessary? Why couldn't you just tell the truth?" Mother looked at me with deep, genuine irritation, the way one looks at a stubborn, throwing a tantrum child demanding an expensive toy in a store. "Listen to me very carefully, Vivian," she spoke in a hard, clinical tone. "Business and life require a ruthless setting of priorities. The world is harsh, and the winner is the one who knows how to allocate resources correctly. Your brother William is the face of this family. He is our reputation, our future ties to Claire's family. Investing in him is rational. It is an investment in the stability and prosperity of our house. But you? You have always been unpredictable, unmanageable. You occupy yourself with dubious little pictures, tie your life to a man without a dime to his name, who digs through rotting boards on the outskirts. We could not afford to risk massive family funds for your whims. We gave you life, gave you a roof over your head, paid for your college. Everything else you must earn yourself since you chose this path of freedom. So do not be so petty, envious, and ungrateful. You should be ashamed of ruining the evening with your tantrums. Petty, envious, and ungrateful? In that exact moment, I realized that I would never call this woman mother again for the rest of my days. Before me stood an absolute moral corpse wrapped in expensive silk, a human being who had sold her soul to mannequins and numbers, and was trying to convince me that this was the sole correct law of the universe. I turned around without uttering another word. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I simply walked back into the orchard, found Jacob in the crowd. He was standing by the fire, smiling, but when he saw my face, his smile vanished instantly. He stepped forward and caught my freezing hands. "Viv, my God, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost. What did that idiot say to you?" "Jacob." I looked him dead in the eye, and in my gaze, he saw something he had never seen before: absolute, merciless resolve. "We are leaving, right now. Our wedding is over." He looked at me, then shifted his gaze to the veranda, where Mother stood haughtily lighting a slim cigarette, then to William, who was cheerfully chatting with some of our guests. Jacob understood everything without another word. He squeezed my fingers tighter. "All right, sweetheart. Let's get out of here, right now." We didn't wait for the end of the reception. We didn't cut the beautiful cake I had decorated myself. We didn't collect the gifts from our friends or explain our reasons to anyone. We simply walked through the orchard to our old, battered car, climbed inside, and drove off into the gathering twilight of the summer night. Left behind me was the blossoming orchard, the fake smiles of my parents, my brother's glossy tuxedo, and a world where I was nothing more than an error in the math. I closed that door forever, and in that moment, I began to breathe truly deeply for the first time in my life. The first 6 months following our flight from the wedding turned into a hell of unceasing psychological warfare from my parents' house. My phone was practically melting from incoming messages and calls. Mother, unaccustomed to anyone daring to disrupt her scripts and show character in front of society, launched a full-scale campaign aimed at obliterating the remnants of my conscience. Every morning began with long, venomous text messages written with the explicit intent of inducing a paralyzing sense of guilt. "You staged a foul, selfish stunt. Leaving your own wedding, abandoning your parents in front of guests is the height of ill-breeding and boorishness. We invested so much strength, health, and money into your upbringing, tolerated all your whims and oddities, and you repaid us with public humiliation? You are just an envious, worthless girl who cannot handle her brother's success. Your father took to his bed with a heart condition after your abominable behavior. His blood pressure hasn't dropped for a week, and if anything happens to him, the blame will rest solely on your conscience." Father acted with more subtlety, more precision, and strictly within the legal framework. A month after the wedding, I received an official, notarized notice from his corporate lawyers. In dry legalese prose, it informed me that I was completely, unconditionally stripped of any association with family trust funds, deprived of any rights to a share in the family business and real estate, and my inheritance rights were annulled. To round it out, they demanded the immediate return of the old compact car Father had once registered under the company name and given me to use during my college years. They were trying to cut off my access to any resources, to punish me with hunger and poverty, to crush my ego and force me to crawl back to them on my knees, begging for forgiveness and agreeing to any terms. But they made one fatal error in their calculations. They judged me by themselves. They thought money was the only cement holding me to this life. They didn't understand that by stripping me of their millions, they had simply unlocked the last chains binding me to their toxic swamp. I did not respond to a single message. I blocked all their phone numbers and deleted my accounts from family group chats. I hired a tow truck, loaded that compact car onto it, brought it to the gates of their elite gated community, left the keys and documents with the security guards, and rode away on a city bus without throwing a single glance back down the road leading to their mansion. Jacob became my rock, my salvation. In those dark months when I shook from the residual stress, when I woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat from nightmares where my parents were bricking me up alive into the concrete foundation of their new shopping mall, he just held me. He held my hand, whispered that I was safe, that we would manage, that we had each other, and that was all that mattered. And his calm, steady strength slowly cauterized the remnants of my parents' venom from my system. We began working like maniacs. I officially registered my small design agency. Initially, our entire staff consisted of me alone, and our office was the old wooden kitchen table in our rented apartment. I took on any job that major studios rejected. I designed interiors for budget hair salons on the city limits, created signage concepts for grocery shops, and selected wallpapers and furniture for the tiny studio apartments of young families. I worked 18 hours a day. My eyes watered from the constant screen glare, and my back grew stiff, but it was my labor. Clients quickly noticed that I didn't work just to punch a clock. In my projects, even the least expensive ones, there was a soul, an ergonomics, and an understanding of human needs, the things Jacob had taught me. My agency began to expand slowly but surely. A year later, we were able to hire 2 talented graduates from my old college and rent a small but highly stylish space in a former textile mill building featuring massive windows and exposed brick walls. We began making real, good money. We opened a savings account and started putting away funds to purchase our own plot of land, where Jacob dreamed of building our house based on his own unique design. Meanwhile, within the ideal, stable world of my parents, the first, barely perceptible tectonic shifts were beginning to manifest. The pillars of their empire were hairline fracturing deeply. Roughly a year and a half after our wedding, William began calling my office line. He always called late at night, from unknown or blocked numbers, and his voice on the phone no longer resembled that of the confident, successful lawyer from a magazine cover. It sounded hollow, slurred, with clear indicators of heavy alcohol intoxication. Panic and despair leaked through the line. "Viv," he mumbled, while the music of some expensive night bar blared in the background. "Viv, it's me. Don't hang up, please. I just need to talk to someone who's alive, you know? Someone real." "William? What happened? Why are you calling at this hour?" I tried to speak coldly, but my heart still tightened. He was my brother, after all. "You were right, Viv. God, you were so right!" He laughed bitterly, hysterically into the receiver. "You think I'm a winner? You think that downtown penthouse and that countryside villa were my gifts? It's a trap, Viv. Father, he's insane. His business has been heading off a cliff for ages. His old projects bring nothing but losses. To stay afloat, he got entangled in a massive construction scam with the Elite Quarter project. He took out gargantuan loans using that real estate as collateral. But the most horrific part? He registered all those shell companies and credit lines in my name. He used my clean reputation, my law degree, and my signatures to cloak his fraud. I am drowning in debt up to my ears, Viv. I can't make a single move, can't leave his firm, because if I flinch, the banks will instantly hit me with bills for millions of dollars. Claire throws non-stop tantrums. Her parents demand that I match their stature, mingle in high society. But I'm not living, Viv. I'm just a walking corpse in an expensive tuxedo. They drained every bit of life out of me. Tell me, Viv, how are things with you? Are you happy on your rotting boards with that restorer of yours? Tell me at least someone is doing well." I listened to his incoherent, drunken speech, and goosebumps raced down my spine. My parents had outdone themselves in their cynicism. They hadn't just invested in the stability of William, they had used their favorite, golden child as a human shield, as a disposable asset onto whom they dumped all the toxic equity and criminal liabilities of their imploding business. They ruined his life just to sustain a pretty facade for a little longer before the neighbors and associates. "William, listen to me," I said quietly and seriously. "Drop everything. Hire independent defense lawyers, blow the whistle on the fraud, clear your name before it's too late. The money, the villas, the penthouses, it's all ash. Walk away from them, or they will drag you straight to the bottom." "Too late, Viv." His voice cracked into a barely audible rasp. "Too many documents are already signed. If I turn on Father, he will grind me into dust first just to save his own skin. I have to play this role to the bitter end. I am sorry about that day in the orchard. I was a fool, a complete fool." He hung up. Following that conversation, he did not reach out for over a year. And then the house of cards Father had built on lies, fraud, and forged statements came crashing down with a deafening roar that shook our entire region. It happened in the third year of my new, free life. Father's grand project, the Elite Quarter, for which hundreds of millions of dollars had been gathered from private investors and state banks, turned out to be a colossal bubble. It emerged that the land for the development had been acquired via forged titles, the environmental clearances had been bought, and the majority of the investment funds had simply evaporated into the offshore accounts of shell companies registered to front entities. But the final straw was a structural catastrophe. Due to severe corner cutting on materials and violations of every conceivable building code, a massive collapse of the load-bearing structures of the main shopping center occurred right during the concrete pouring stage. By a stroke of luck, no one was killed, but the scale of the damage was such that hiding the truth became impossible. The prosecutor's office opened a massive criminal case regarding fraud on an especially large scale, document forgery, and the creation of a financial pyramid scheme. The investors, who turned out to include highly influential and dangerous figures in the city, mobilized all their leverage. The banks immediately slapped a freeze on all of Father's accounts, assets, and properties. Court bailiffs repossessed everything: their luxurious mansion of white limestone, the fleet of cars, William's countryside villa, and his downtown penthouse. Everything went under the hammer to cover at least a fraction of the astronomical losses. Claire, upon learning that her husband faced a real prison sentence and that his family was completely ruined, didn't hesitate for a single second before filing for divorce. Her parents, utilizing their medical and political connections, did everything to completely erase William's name from their lives and insulate their reputation from our family's toxic fallout. The golden boy turned overnight into the prime defendant in the case, abandoned by everyone, without a cent in his pocket, without a roof over his head, and facing the prospect of spending the next 10 years in a prison cell. Their grand investment in stability had culminated in a total, absolute, crushing disaster. I was sitting in my new, spacious office, which was bathed in soft evening light. We had just signed a major contract to design the interiors for a new chain of rural eco-hotels. It was a massive milestone for our team, the culmination of months of sleepless nights and relentless grit. I was reviewing the initial sketches for the lobbies when the entrance door to my office swung open without a knock. A woman stood on the threshold. It took me nearly a minute of intense silence to recognize this pitiful creature as my once majestic, haughty mother. Absolutely nothing remained of the former Mrs. Eleanor. Her immaculate updo, on which she used to spend hours, had devolved into disheveled, greasy gray strands carelessly pinned up with an old plastic claw clip. She wore a worn, rumpled coat with traces of mud along the hem, missing a button. Her face, once smooth thanks to expensive cosmetics and treatments, was gaunt, lined with deep wrinkles, and heavy dark shadows pooled beneath her eyes. Her lips were trembling with a fine, sporadic shudder. Behind her back, his head tucked into his shoulders, stood Father. He looked even worse. The imposing, self-assured businessman before whom subordinates cringed had turned into a hunched, frightened old man with an entirely vacant, wandering gaze. He wore an old suit that was several sizes too large for him, and he maintained a frantic, death-grip clutch on a battered leather briefcase, the sole item he had apparently managed to salvage from the repossessed mansion before the judicial seals were slapped onto the doors. A dead, ringing silence fell over my office. My employees, who sat at their computers in the open-plan area, froze, sensing a colossal, almost physically oppressive tension burst into the room along with these people. "Leave us, please," I said quietly but distinctly to my team, not rising from my chair. "Work is wrapped up for today. You may all head home." The staff quickly, trying not to make a sound, gathered their things, shut down their equipment, and hastily exited the office, casting frightened and bewildered glances at the uninvited guests. When the heavy entrance door clicked shut, cutting us off from the rest of the world, Mother took a few hesitant steps forward, deeper into my office. Her fingers, which no longer bore a single expensive ring, frantically toyed with the strap of her old handbag. "Vivian," her voice sounded raspy, broken, scraping against the nerves. It held none of that chilling politeness, arrogance, or commanding tone. It was the voice of a drowning person trying to grab the edge of a blade. "Vivian, my girl, we found you. Things have been so hard for us, you can't even begin to imagine. Surely you know what happened. This horrific catastrophe, those traitors, those wolves your father called partners. They framed us, stripped us of every single cent. We were evicted from our home, Vivian. We literally have nowhere to sleep tonight. We don't even have money for a cheap motel." I sat behind my large oak desk, which Jacob and I had found at an old factory, and spent 3 weeks manually stripping of layers of old varnish before coating it with oil. I looked at these people, and absolutely nothing stirred inside me. There was no spite, no triumph, no desire to scream, "I told you so!" There was only a deep, sterile, icy calm, the exact same silence they had submerged me in throughout my childhood. "I know what happened," I replied smoothly and evenly, looking Mother straight in the eye. "It's being blasted on every street corner. Your last name is currently on the front pages of every criminal chronicle in the region." Father took a step forward from behind Mother's back. His knees trembled slightly, and his voice cracked into a pathetic falsetto. "Vivian, listen. William is facing real prison time. They could sentence him to 8 years. The lawyers are demanding massive, completely astronomical sums for his defense, just to get him moved to house arrest for the duration of the investigation and drop a portion of the charges. Everything of ours is seized. We are bankrupt. But we found out that your agency is thriving. You are making excellent money. You have major contracts. Vivian, you must help us. You are obligated to save your brother and support your parents at this horrific, critical juncture. This is your direct duty to your family, to the people who raised you, gave you life and an education. We are of one blood, Vivian. Family must stick together in times of trouble." I slowly rose from my chair. My movements were fluid and confident. I walked over to the large panoramic window of my office and looked out at the street. A heavy summer downpour was starting. Large drops beat against the glass with a clatter, leaving long, crooked tracks that resembled fractures on an old mirror. "My duty?" I turned to face them, leaning my back against the windowsill, and a faint, barely perceptible smile appeared on my face. "My duty to you, Father? You know, my duty was paid in full, down to the very last cent, by my lonely, scorched childhood in your crystal mausoleum. It was paid by every single tear I shed in the dusty attic, by every ink stain on my fingers that you and Mother so thoroughly despised. It was paid on that day when you stood in the apple orchard at my wedding, and looking me dead in the eye, lied that you didn't have a single dollar to help me start my life. When you staged a performance about a crisis just to conceal million-dollar gifts for your golden boy." Mother took another step toward me, tears streaming from her eyes, leaving dirty tracks on her pale, unkempt skin. She extended her hands toward me, trying to grasp the hem of my blazer. "Vivian, for God's sake, how can you bring up these old grievances now, when we are standing before you practically on our knees? Yes, we made mistakes. We were strict with you, perhaps unjust in some places. But we did all of it for the good of the family. We were trying to preserve our status, to ensure the stability of the lineage. You cannot be this cruel. You cannot abandon your brother in prison." "You invested in stability, Mother. I cut her off loudly and sharply, and my voice rang out like a steel hammer, echoing off the brick walls of the office. You invested in status, in reputation, in a pretty picture for glossy magazines. William was your primary, diamond asset, your masterpiece, and your guarantee of personal prosperity. But I was vacuum, a risk, an error in the math that you wrote off as a loss back in my childhood. My congratulations to you, dear investors. Your premier project turned out to be a bubble and completely imploded. Market reality turned out to be far harsher than your fake plans, didn't it? And now, when your facade has collapsed, burying you beneath the rubble, you crawl to the very vacuum you despised and demand dividends? You demand that I pay for father's sins and your brother's stupidity? Vivian, please, stop. Father buried his face in his old, shaking hands. A muffled, strangled groan escaped his chest. It was the moment of his final, total undoing, not financial, but mental. His ego, his pride, his entire philosophy of life were pulverized right here, in the office of the daughter he had held in such contempt. Leave, I said quietly, but with absolute, unyielding power, returning to my desk. I have no money for you. I have no connections for you. And I no longer have a single drop of pity for you. You received precisely what you engineered with your own hands. You sowed coldness, lies, and calculation, and now you reap the whirlwind. I grant you what you have earned, the stable, absolute, and eternal absence of me from your lives. Forever. Mother's face shifted instantly. That entire mask of a miserable, weeping victim, all that staged submissiveness vanished in a single second. Her eyes narrowed into two slits filled with primal, venomous malice. She balled her hands into fists, her body tensing like a predator before a strike. You are a monster, Vivian, she hissed, her voice escalating into a screech that made the glassware ring on the shelf. You heartless, vindictive, selfish bitch! We raised a viper at our breast. We fed you, clothed you, tolerated your ridiculous antics, and you abandon your parents on the street in their darkest hour. You will be cursed, do you hear me? God will punish you for this betrayal. You will crawl back to us yet. You will regret every single word. I already regretted it, I replied calmly, looking at her with a deep compassion that made her flinch even harder. I regretted spending the first 20 years of my life trying to earn the love and approval of people who are fundamentally incapable of loving anyone but their offshore accounts. Security! I pressed the selector button on my office phone. Please escort these citizens out of my office and add their faces to the blacklist of the access control system. They are never to appear on the premises of this building again. 2 large, sturdy guards from the business center instantly entered the office. They took my parents by the arms, politely but completely authoritatively. Mother tried to break free, continuing to scream, hurl curses, her face distorted with rage and impotence. Father offered no resistance. He walked silently, his head hanging low, dragging his old shoes across our hardwood floor, still pressing his empty leather briefcase to his chest. The door closed. The sound of their footsteps and Mother's screeches slowly faded down the long corridor of the mill building. Silence reclaimed the office, but it was a completely different kind of silence. It was the silence of victory, the silence of ultimate liberation from the ghosts of the past. I sat back in my chair, closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life, felt that this house, this office, this air, and this future belonged exclusively to me. Another 3 years passed. Time is the finest restorer. It gradually skins over even the deepest wounds, leaving only pale, insensitive scars in their place. The investigation into Father's case was drawn out, unearthing layer upon layer of financial fraud. Ultimately, given his advanced age, lack of prior convictions, and sharply deteriorating health, the court showed leniency. He received a lengthy suspended sentence and colossal fines that entirely wiped out any remnants of their hidden reserves. Currently, he and Mother live in a tiny social housing apartment on the absolute periphery of the city, in a gray, faceless panel block. They exist on the minimum state old age allowance. Occasionally, handwritten letters from Mother arrive in my office mail. She writes them by hand on cheap paper in a shaking, uneven script. There are no apologies in these letters. It is the same old familiar manipulation. She details her illnesses at length, complains about the cold in the apartment, about lacking money for medication, and accuses me of ingratitude and cruelty that will return to visit you through your own children. I don't read these letters to the end. I neatly feed them into the shredder without even unsealing the envelopes. My past burned down, and I have no intention of sifting through its ashes to feed someone else's illusions. William was less fortunate, or more fortunate depending on how you look at it from the perspective of his human redemption. Thanks to good independent lawyers, he managed to hire by selling his remaining luxury watches, cars, and personal effects. He succeeded in proving that he was merely a blind instrument in Father's hands, and remained ignorant of the true scale of the scam. He managed to avoid real incarceration, but he received a 3-year suspended sentence and a lifetime ban on practicing law in any capacity. This completely obliterated him as a professional, trampling that glossy persona Father had so painstakingly cultivated. The golden boy was broken and tossed to the wayside of life by the very system he had so blindly worshipped. A year ago, at the start of summer, he came to see me. Without warning, without a phone call. He had simply tracked down the address of the new house Jacob and I shared. We had built it ourselves on that very plot of land on the hill by the river we had dreamed of for so long. Jacob designed it out of dark, charred wood and massive panoramic glass panels. There are no laser levels for aligning pictures in this house. My canvases, sketches, and children's drawings hang on the walls. It permanently smells of dried lavender, fresh baking, wood, and coffee. There is plenty of noise, laughter, and life here because our friends gather at our place often, and our little 2-year-old daughter sleeps in the nursery. William stood at our gate. He wore simple, worn jeans, an ordinary cotton jacket, and basic sneakers. His once golden hair had darkened, a distinct, heavy gray streaked his temples, and his eyes no longer held that cold, victorious glint of superiority. He looked ordinary, a tired, earthly man. But within this ordinariness of his, within those crinkles around his eyes, something genuine, warm, and alive manifested for the very first time in his life. We sat on the veranda of our house for a long time, drinking tea from large clay mugs and watching the sun slowly sink into the river, painting the water in crimson and gold hues. We didn't talk about our parents. We didn't revisit that horrific wedding in the apple orchard, nor did we discuss courts and asset seizures. It was unnecessary. The past remained out there, beyond the fence of our home. We spoke of the future. William shared that he had moved to a small coastal town, found a job as an ordinary clerk in a small construction firm, helps draft basic estimates, and is learning to draft blueprints in the evenings, having developed a passion for landscape design. "You know, Viv," he said quietly, pressing his palms against the warm mug of tea and looking out at the river. "I am only now, after all these years, beginning to realize the colossal price you paid for your freedom on the day you walked out of your wedding. And what a terrifying, extortionate price I paid for agreeing to be their prime investment project. You turned out to be wiser and stronger than all of us, Viv. You built your own house on living, honest boards, with your own hands. While we built ours on a rotting foundation of lies, calculation, and the tears of others. Our house couldn't help but collapse." I placed my palm on his shoulder. This time, there was no abyss between us, no walls. Before me sat my brother. Not the golden boy William, but a human being who had managed to journey through the hell of a shipwreck, survive, and begin putting himself back together, brick by brick. "The main thing is that you're here, Will," I replied softly, smiling at him. "And you are finally free from their expectations. You are finally alive." My story has arrived at its final chapter. It began in a crystal mausoleum on a hill, journeyed through betrayal, lies, and the icy calculation of those who should have loved me simply because, by right of birth. My parents' wedding gift truly destroyed everything. It annihilated their empire, tore up our illusions, stripped us of our former stature, and erased our old life to the foundations. But upon those ruins, I succeeded in building something far more vital, durable, and eternal. My own independent reality, founded on love, integrity, and respect for the labor of others. I am no longer the black sheep of our family, nor a risk, nor a vacuum. I am Vivian, a woman who authored every single paragraph of her own destiny without asking permission from those who attempted to convert her life into a line item of a commercial balance sheet. And if you currently find yourself in a similar cage, if it feels like the walls around you are too thick and your own voice is drowned out by the ambitions of others, do not fear. Turn your back on those walls. Step out into your personal night. Do not fear building your life on rotting boards, because it is upon them, as it turns out, that the most honest, the strongest, and the most vibrant flowers of your true freedom grow. This story is just one of many where justice prevails. If you want more spine-chilling dramas, subscribe to our channel and become part of the Storytime drama community. Leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.